You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. Today, we're going to dive into the world of some executive coaching and specifically some models about leading teams and building the right kind of culture in the face of failures you may encounter and challenges along the way, just basic leadership stuff. But my guest is a lady named Erin Herman. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Doug. Pleasure to be here.
I always like to start with a little bit of a question about your backstory, kind of your journey to get into the work that you're doing now and how you're helping people. Tell us what that may be.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started my career in elevator and escalator sales. So I was quite literally paid to help people move up in the world, and I did that for about 8 years and worked my way up into various global leadership opportunities and was really successful with the sales component of that work. So I really thought at the time I could model that success and translate it into every future role that I went on to take. And so my next role was a job at the United Nations Children's Fund, and I was leading their corporate partnership development team. And, I did what any smart 28-year-old from Kansas that had just accepted a job at the UN would do. I went to my local Macy's. I bought a white power coat because I thought it was so important to play the part. And I went in there with this mindset that, hey, what's worked for me in the past is going to work for me in the future. And I was so focused on results. I remember, my first day there, I had flown to New York. I've got my power coat on. And the chief development officer at the time said, hey, why don't you come into my office and share a little bit about why you want to be here. And I thought, okay, great. And I had started on the same day as another woman, and we both took our seats. And, being the profound professional that I really believed I was, I said, hey, do you want to answer his question first about why we're both here? And so she said, oh, sure. And so she starts talking about the fact that she is, internationally acclaimed. She's done all these field visits, humanitarian work, you name it. She sounded exactly like somebody that should be in that room. And then it was my turn. And I had just finished reading the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. So I am leaning across this gentleman's desk at a solid 50-degree angle. Our faces are literally about 2 inches from one another. And I thought, I'm just going to hit him with the facts. I'm going to really impress him. And so I said, well, I'm here because I have been the top seller of elevators and escalators in the world for the top 3 years running. Boom, mic drop. Like, just what a fact to hit him with. And when he looked back at me, his smile went from curious to just completely bewildered. Like, why are you sitting in my office? And it was really the start of my journey about recognizing not only the skill sets that we may possess at the beginning, but how those have to evolve over time. But it also incorporated my studying, or I would almost say understudy of leadership. Within that first year, everybody on my team had quit or I had fired them. Complete disaster. But when I learned to be curious and completely flip the switch around, and I started to grow with the team through change instead of managing them through change, we turned it all around. We went from 2 million to 80 million in over 5 years. And that really kicked off my journey of leadership. And then from the UN, I went on to work at at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And I was tasked with building out their corporate strategy, executing their global partnerships. And while I was at St. Jude, I actually had received a phone call. I was in a board meeting at the time. From my sister, and she had said, hey, dad's been placed on life support and you need to get home as soon as possible. And, I packed up my stuff. I jumped on a plane and I headed out to Wisconsin to fly home, and I missed my dad by about 10 minutes. And, I had come back to work after that 2 or 3 days later, and I just tried to put on a brave face and, really not miss a beat. And in that instance, I realized that I couldn't do it. I couldn't show up the way I needed to show up for my team amongst everything that had happened. And while I was sitting there just kind of contemplating, all right, what does this look like? I don't know if this is for me anymore. this woman knocks on my door and she says, hey, Erin, do you mind if I come in for a little bit? And I said, sure. And we started talking and she said, I just live for Friday afternoons. And I said, well, I do too. I get to fly home and see my family in Kansas City. And she said, no, I really live for Friday around 2:00. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It's close to happy hour. I get it. I was just trying to be relatable. And she said, no, Erin, it's when you send out your Friday emails. And I had made it a practice from every Friday, from the first Friday I started to the last day I was there, that I would send an email to my entire department Friday afternoon with a theme, navigating charisma during conflict, or, empathy in action. And I would tell a story, I would share a theme, and then I would go through and I would highlight employees that had exemplified that quality that week. And she said, I've saved every single one of your emails, and every week I open it up hoping my name is in there. And it made me realize in that moment of just transformation in my personal life combined with my professional life, that the things I loved most were really pulling at me to make that significant change, which is what I speak on, change management and navigating transformational change. And so from there, I took a step back and I said, I'm going to bet on myself and I'm going to make the biggest change of my career. I'm going to pack up the salary and the title and the guaranteed health insurance, and I'm going to go out on my own, because I was so confident that this little skill that I had, I could take it into global rooms of 2,000 people. And if I could impact one, think about what I could do for so many. And so made the transition and became a keynote speaker. And that's what I do today.
So amazing story. And tell us a little bit about the focal points. I know change management is a thing and has been around for a while. Truthfully, when I started coaching a number of years ago, I was kind of camped out in the change management arena. Discovered some of my passions were a little bit separate from that, and change management was just one of many encounters leaders would have along the way. But talk to us a little more about, you have a model you call your KEG model. How does that apply to this?
Yeah, when I was doing global partnerships for the UN, I was fortunate enough to be in rooms with heads of state, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, you name it. I was front and center. And what I took away from every single room that I was in was these three qualities. They were just exuded through conversation, collaboration. And I started to notice the same three popping up in every single meeting: courage, empathy, and a growth mindset. So after a while, it became so vivid to me. I could not ignore it. And so I took those three qualities and I built them into a present day methodology to really take change and make it not this scary, uncomfortable, panic-driven connotation that I think it has, but really, how do we make it the biggest, boldest, transformational opportunity of your career? And how do we do that by bringing your team and your organization and providing a seat at the table for you all to have that discussion to level up collectively? And it has been just amazing to see, because I think from a private sector perspective in particular, the revenue goals and the return on investment, those expectations are never going to go away. But when you learn how to take this methodology and apply it to your work, you double down. You develop double the revenue, double the return on investment, and it really becomes catalytic. And that's why I love my job, because I see people grow, but I also see results grow too. And that is, simultaneous. It goes hand in hand.
Yeah, so let's break that down to the next level of granularity here. So courage, empathy, and growth mindset. Maybe let's start from the rear, if we may. Your point about growth. Pretty much every CEO or business owner everywhere has some notion of, I want to build this business up to some imaginary level, whether that's a 2x or 3x or, put dollar signs on it. 10 million, 100 million, whatever. So that's kind of a given. Is there any aspect of that that's different in your model or other elements of that growth mindset that you talk about?
You know, growth mindset requires one thing, and it's pretty simple. It requires you to be uncomfortable over and over and over. The minute you start to feel comfortable with your organization, your team, your communication, how you push people, you're doing it wrong. You have to feel uncomfortable 24/7. That will lead to the biggest growth. The second thing that you need to do is you have to completely change your attitude towards failure. And honestly, I see this a lot in the Fortune 500 to Fortune 1000 space. Now, I will say I think tech companies do this pretty well, but there is this adverse reaction to failure. People are terrified to fail. They are terrified to make mistakes. Somebody behind them is going to surpass them. They're going to get fired. They're going to lose their job, be demoted. You name it, what the connotation is. But there is an adverse reaction to failure within a prevalent number of large organizations today. What tech does that I think is interesting and that should really become replicable across multiple organizations is they embrace failure. They embrace the challenges. They say, let's fail as fast as possible so that we can ideate into what works. I talk about Thomas Edison, and everyone associates Thomas with inventing the light bulb. But what they don't associate him with is the fact that he failed 10,000 times trying to invent it before actually bringing it to market. And when you ask him, did you fail? He says, no. I learned 10,000 reasons how not to do it. That is power. That is a growth mindset. So
Right.
Those are some of the examples that I would bring in with growth. And it's all about changing your perspective.
I think you raise a good point there, and I had an opportunity have had an opportunity over the years being in the Houston area to work with some of the big oils, and there is a pivot happening, I think, at large, but to the extent, they're all in the Fortune 100 club, and there is a mindset about fail there and the way it's typically talked about there is that traditionally for 100 years in those companies, when an opportunity came forward, there had to be an assessment, there had to be an analysis of the opportunity, and they had to solve the question to 100% certainty. Well, what they discovered painfully is that 80% of the data they needed to get to that 100% could be done quickly. It was right at hand, and it could inform a lot about the go or no go on the decision. But getting that last 20% to have 100% certainty was painful, slow, often so slow, so delayed that they missed the opportunity. So what has been a pendulum shift, and it started before COVID, and I believe has continued, is that now they're saying it's okay. 70 or 80% certainty is okay. We're
Right.
not going to find material difference that's going to sway our decision. It's highly unlikely, and even if it does prove to be wrong, that's okay.
Right. Yep.
We are going to genuinely call it okay. And to your point, traditionally, the guy that previously said go at 70 or 80 and was wrong, they were crucified.
Right.
There were public hangings and floggings
Right.
and
Right.
symbolically, but nonetheless, black balls in the personnel file and all of that. And that was part of the culture that they had to get rid of.
Well, and I think the unique part to that, and that's what really goes along with the symbiotic relationship of growth, is courage, because you need to have courage to take those initial steps. People think courage is associated with being perfect. I've got to do this just right, and in order to achieve growth and to 100%. But really, courage is about just taking the first step. Courage is about putting yourself out there. And I always tell this story. I didn't always have courage. In fact, I think it's easier to stay silent than it is to speak up. That was my mindset. Easier to be liked than to be disliked. Then I got to a point where I thought, this isn't serving my organization. This isn't serving my team. And in order to be great, to really be transformational, to make things extraordinary, I had to change who I was. And so I started this practice. I call it mirror meetings, where every morning, my husband's right next to me getting ready in the same mirror, but he has a front row seat to my mirror meetings. And in these meetings, it's almost like dating myself. And I always say, I didn't realize I love dating myself so much, but I have a full dialogue in the morning in the mirror about, you can do hard things. You've done them before. You can get up on stage today in front of a room of 2,000 people, and you're going to knock this message out of the park. Or, hey, you've got a big call on the books, and you're going to be able to speak through it eloquently and diligently and make sure you get this done. This self-talk is so important when it goes hand in hand with courage, because we don't walk around in society affirming one another. We don't say, hey, you got this. Like, you are the best today. We just don't do it. We should, but we don't. We don't do it enough. And the second reason I do that is because our internal voice is the most important voice that we should hear. Our self-talk will guide how we show up day after day. And so I started this practice, and it led to a personal transformation for me with being courageous, speaking up, being in those moments that matter most, letting people know this matters, but so do you. And it's been a game changer. And I love talking about it to people.
So if I may, on that point, doing simple math, I think the backside of that coin about being courageous is what's popularly known as the imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Some person gets promoted up or hired into a role that's significantly bigger than they have ever known. And immediately there's this kind of self-doubt that creeps in, and you're kind of asking the question, what do I not know about what I'm supposed to know? And what if I get found out, and all of these things? Now, some people, to your point, manage that better than others. I contend everybody has those questions thrown at them, whether it's the face in the mirror asking you the question or right. somebody else. But it's the person that I think has that self-courage to overcome that and say, you know what? And one of the things I do with my coaching clients who present a concern for an imposter syndrome, I challenge them to go back a few years in their career. Well, let's turn the page backwards. Let's go back a couple of jobs. And what did you feel, think, and believe about this particular promotion when you were given that one? Mm-hmm. And they start realizing, oh, I kind of thought these same things. I asked myself these same questions, and I said, and you overcame them, right? And yeah, I did. I figured it out. I got it going. So see where I'm going with this question?
Right. Well, and it's a great question to ask, because I always say, who better than me? And I ask my audience, who better than you? Like, who better than you to take on these roles? And who hasn't been in the same spot as you? Ask yourself that. Will Packard talks about this concept called healthy arrogance. And I think it ties so nicely into imposter syndrome, because, for example, when I worked at the UN, I would sit in these rooms. People would literally talk about, oh, I went to Harvard and I worked on this project, and I went to Yale and I did this. Eventually it would get to me in the room, and they would say, well, Erin, where did you go to school? And I would say, University of Kansas, I'm a Jayhawk. And everyone would start laughing, and it was dead silent. And you know what? I loved it. You know why? Because I had the healthy arrogance. I realized in that moment, I have the same right as everybody else to be in that room, around that table. What my responsibility is to let people know why. We all have our own perspectives, our own insights, our own identities. It's on us to share that in the room, to share our insights. We bring something to the room. And healthy arrogance isn't about being better than anyone. It's not about ego. It's truly about ownership. And when you can own your seat at that table, that's transformational.
Along that line, I've always reminded of an interview that was done with Tom Hanks, and he was talking about in his early acting career, he was on a project, and there was another, A-list star that was on the roster, but the guy was notoriously bad at, bad behavior, and the director, kind of in front of God and everybody, finally got fed up with this guy one day and said, "Look, I expect three things from you. I need you to be here on time. I need you to know your lines, and I need you to have a take." In other words, you got to have an idea about what you think this character you're playing is supposed to be doing. I don't want to give you all of that. You need to have a take. And I've kind of gravitated to that third element. Yeah, the first two, yes. You need to show up on time. You need to know your lines. In the case of our corporate roles, we're talking about, you need to know something about what you're doing. You've got to do that. But the have a take is so powerful. It's kind of the idea of own it. Cast your own vision of where you want to go and where you want your team to be going. Then when you get invited to the meeting, speak it, claim it, name it, and represent what you believe in. And yeah, you can have one-off meetings and float it out to your senior managers, senior leaders, and see if they agree with it. But sometimes, even if they don't, if you've got reason to believe it really is the right answer, well, you got to own it and you got to have the courage to move it forward.
Yeah. And I love that you say that because, I love asking people, how many times have you reinvented yourself in your career? New titles, new roles, maybe how you showed up in the past isn't how you show up now. You reinvent yourself every single day. It's the people that get stuck in their comfort zones that ultimately become their cages, that they're not able to grow with you. And reinvention is a beautiful component to this whole world that we're talking about. And it's something that people have to own. It's okay to reinvent yourself. The part that you anchor to is your values. So what do you want people to rely on you for? How do you want to show up? What's important to you? Is this in alignment with what you're looking to do and to accomplish? If you can answer those questions every day, you're on the right path. You're doing everything right. And if you don't, then you've got to ask more questions. You've got to go deeper within yourself and figure out, okay, what am I missing? How do I reevaluate?
Yeah.
That drives growth.
So we've talked about growth. We've talked about the courage. Let's talk about the empathy a little bit. What is your takeaway, and how do you describe the need for this empathy in a leader?
Empathy gets a really bad association in the workplace. Everyone thinks it's a weak skill. It's a soft skill. It's almost a negative at times, but it's actually a power skill. It is a power skill. Empathy keeps people in the room when everything is swirling around you. Forbes recently came out and said, hey, empathy is the most important skill to possess in the workplace. It leads to 90% job satisfaction, 79% reduction in employee turnover. I'm not good at math, but what I do take away from that is 8 out of 10 people that would normally walk out, they don't. They stay in the trenches with you every day. And I oftentimes talk about empathy in motion, right? So when my dad passed, at St. Jude, and I had gone home, and my 40th birthday was approaching, and I remember I didn't really feel like celebrating. And I had just acquired about 20 more direct reports. I'd picked up another big division that was under me a few weeks prior. So I was just kind of still getting my feet acquired with everything. Anyways, my birthday morning, Saturday morning, I pour myself a cup of coffee. I go to the mailbox. and I see this letter in there, and it's just this white letter. There's no return address, big, bold, black letters, Erin Herman. I thought, well, that's weird. So I take it back to my house. I sit down, I open it up, and a new team member named Tracy had dedicated a Catholic TV network mass service in honor of my dad. And she did this because we didn't live in the same state, and she wanted me to be able to visually see something that I could align with the fact that, hey, people are thinking about you. I'm thinking about you. And for me, that was empathy in motion. It's not just saying you care about somebody, but you're really caring for somebody. And I oftentimes ask audiences, who's your Tracy? Who has shown up for you in your life like Tracy did for me on the most unexpected way in a Saturday in April? That is empathy in motion. And, I don't think there are too many better leaders to highlight than Herb Keller, the old CEO of Southwest Airlines. He embodied the culture of empathy. I mean, Herb would remember your name if you're a baggage handler in LA, and 12 months later, you happen to see him in New York at the annual meeting. He would know every detail about your family. He would recite your name. And that led to a culture of amazing results. I mean, they had 75,000 employees at the time. They had less than 4% turnover. That is amazing for an airline. And, I can riddle off the stats, but we all can agree. I think we're all probably seasoned travelers. Southwest isn't the nicest set of planes, but I would probably affirm with everybody else that they have some of the nicest staff. One of my team members, she had shared that, she was working on her laptop flying Southwest, and one of the stewardesses had actually spilled coffee all over her laptop. Turbulence had hit, disaster strike. And she had ended up emailing Herb at the time. And sure enough, there's this letter, and I always show it in my keynotes, but a letter back from him saying, I'm so sorry. That's really unfortunate. You had to deal with that. Here's a new laptop. And that to me is empathy in action. And that is what keeps people flying on your planes, showing up in your rooms, and working with you when the times are the hardest.
Yeah. Yeah, Herb was definitely a giant among men, and I had a unique opportunity. The bank where I worked in my early career, Herb was a director on our board, and so he would often, when we were having a board meeting, he would come to our officer meetings that we would have and speak to our group, and so I kind of got to see him up live and in person, sharing some of his stories. And likewise, on the empathy part, one of the famous stories he liked to tell us was attributed to the basic question, is the customer always right? And Herb was adamant about saying, no, hell no. And he would tell the story about their terminal in Dallas Love Field, which was not a great airport for many years. It was just poorly configured and tight, and the hallways were narrow. And when there was any flight interruption, it was just usually chaos. And sure enough, one Friday night, there was a weather system, so flights were delayed, and there was this one lobby area that had 3 different gates all feeding into this one area. So it was just chaos in there. People were in there elbow to elbow. And there was one customer that was inebriated and really out of control, and he was verbally abusing the gate agents over what's wrong with the flights and when, it was time to go. And anyway, it finally came time to board the flight, and he hopped up and elbowed his way to the front of the line, only to meet 3 Dallas police officers. And they cuffed him and drug him out of the lobby. And he was screaming, about missing his flight, and, they're going to pay for this, yada, yada, yada. But as he went off into the sunset, the whole terminal erupted in applause. And it was a gate agent who had reported this guy, and they were empowered to do such things. They didn't have to call the headquarters and get permission. They had already been trained and told you that your action will be supported. And Herb's point to us when he was talking about it, he said, now, did we alienate one customer that day? He said, yeah, we sure did. He said, but we endeared about 400 others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very empowering with his staff. And I think, you've got to ask yourself, what type of culture do you want to create? What type of culture do people want to be a part of? They want to be a part of the culture where they feel empowered to make those types of decisions, where they know they're going to be supported to make those types of decisions. I think support and empowerment, they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And I think they feel that through the empathy in which Herb probably led with.
Yeah. Great stuff. Well, Erin, this has been great. I think we're about up on time. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Connect with me. My website, www.theerinherman.com. It's got the topics in which I speak on. I also offer workshop sessions for certain situations that are sticking points in the workplace that we're looking to navigate collectively. I also provide consulting services. And I also have a list of cities that I'm touring on where you can come out and hear me speak. Also, feel free to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. I do take time and respond to every message that I receive. I love to hear who your Tracy is or what your mirror meeting looks like. So drop me a line, let me know. I will definitely respond. And just thanks again, Doug, for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for sitting in. And as always, folks, we're going to have those links in the show notes. So hop down, mash the buttons, and check out Erin's work. I do want to remind you, we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out our archives. If you've got an idea for a guest or a topic we haven't covered yet, please drop me a line, let me know that. I look forward to hearing from you. But with that, we're going to wrap this thing up. Say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.